When you've had a long week and want to mix it up with something new and interesting to eat, try Blue Apron's 2 or 4 serving menu plans with those hard-to-find ingredients sure to spice up your weekend. With 60-plus options each week, you can choose from an ever-changing mix of high-quality meat, fish, vegetarian, WW recommended, and wellness offerings. Order now and get $110 off across your first 5 orders when you visit blueapron.com/unique.
Welcome back to the Direct-to-Video Connoisseur Podcast. This is Matt here, and I am joined this week by a very special guest. We've got Will back once again from Exploding Helicopter. Welcome back, Will.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here once again.
Yes. Now you were on before for the Red Scorpion episode, and so anybody who wants sort of the Exploding Helicopter origin story, we covered that in that previous episode, so people can go back and check that one out. But this one, we're going to kind of dive right into the meat of things and kind of get right after it.
Sounds good to me, Matt.
Now, when I had come to you about coming back on the show here, I had mentioned the fact that, I think we're like 70 episodes in, and we have not done a Don the Dragon Wilson themed podcast. And so I was like, I saw Ring of Fire had an exploding helicopter, and so that's why I figured I'd come to you and say, hey, let's do this. Let's maybe give Don a little bit of credit here. Give him a little bit of the spotlight.
Well, I was shocked to hear that you hadn't actually tackled one of his films on your podcast before, because obviously, he's somebody that I think he's in your Hall of Fame on your website. So, yeah, I was a bit surprised that you hadn't got round to him on your podcast.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it, and I think one of the things was he went on hiatus around like 2007, I think, and he didn't do anything for a while. And then, he got back into it, I guess, probably while I was on hiatus. I think it was like in the mid-2010s he got back in, and now he is making films again. But I think that might have been what happened. Was it was like I had covered all of his films so long ago that it was like I almost kind of put him out of my mind. Unfortunately, it's like,
how dare you?
I know, exactly. It's like everybody else is making new stuff, but of course that doesn't explain why I haven't done a Gary Daniels one yet either, and he's still making stuff, so you never know. But yeah, so we figured we'd rectify this. Now, one thing I noticed on your site, I believe he's number 4 in terms of most films with exploding helicopters.
Well, Matt, I actually have some breaking news for you, because I have just this very day promoted Don the Dragon Wilson to second place in our pantheon of actors who've been in the most films with exploding helicopters, because shame on me, I'd actually missed out a couple of films that he appears in that have exploding helicopters. So he is now in second place, and he's now appeared in a total of 10 films with exploding helicopters. So he's just one behind Dolph Lundgren and Samuel L. Jackson.
Wow, that is amazing. Now, one thing I noticed when I was looking at the list before you updated it was this film that we're going to talk about, Ring of Fire 3, is the only PM Entertainment one that I saw on that list. Did you add some extra PM Entertainments for him, or were they other films?
Yeah, so there's a couple of PM Entertainment films. It's Cybertracker 1 and 2 have now been added to his collection of films with a chopper fireball.
Excellent. Now Cybertracker is one that's we'll talk about a little bit, because it features a similar type of exploding helicopter, I guess, a similar method. So that's something to bring up. And yeah, when I was looking at your list, I was like, wow, it's crazy that someone who, even the fact that it's only a few PM Entertainments out of his 10 still kind of shocks me, that for someone who did a lot of PM Entertainment films, that you'd think that his PM Entertainment number would be higher. Because I feel like that's a studio, that's a movie house that must have provided a lot of work for you at the site.
They certainly have, and I was just going through updating some other records as well, and Richard Pepin, who obviously is one of the founding fathers of PM Entertainment, he has directed the most films with an exploding helicopter, and he has directed 9 films with an exploding helicopter, which is a ridiculously impressive ratio when you think that he's only directed 15 films in total, and 9 of them have a whirlybird blowing up.
That's amazing. And I wonder too, like for him, like because I got the sense, and maybe I'm wrong about this with PM Entertainment, that between him and Merhi, it was almost like they flipped a coin to see who would direct the movie the next time. And then he was like, I think he was a cinematographer, all the ones that Merhi directed, but it's almost like he flipped the coin and got that many exploding helicopter movies.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to know, like, on how they divvied up the responsibilities. Like, you know what, you're directing this one, I'll do the DP work. I don't really know. I'd love to get an inside line on how they decided to, switch the roles around between them on the films that they made.
Yeah, and it seems like just about anybody was able to direct for them. It was like I mean, Art Camacho, someone who's going to come up here and admit, and I mean, he was relatively new in the business when he started with PM Entertainment, and I think that's how he got his start directing. I haven't looked, I haven't seen when his first directing roles were, but I think that's how he got his start. Like they were just like, they probably were like, yeah, if you want to direct this, go ahead, and see how you do it. I mean, Recoil he directed, which is my favorite PM Entertainment, so it's not like he was any slouch when it came to it, but it almost feels like when it came to them, especially if you were willing to probably do it on the cheap for them, if they were, oh, okay, you're going to direct this and not, charge us a lot. Sure, go ahead and try it. And, good on someone like Art Camacho, because I think he kind of took his experience with PM and made it into something when he left PM that, allowed him to grow further in the industry. And I'm sure there are a lot of other people that did that too, where they were just like, yeah, go ahead and do that if you want. As long as you don't charge us for it, we'll be happy to have you do it. So.
Yeah, I think if you were prepared to work cheap, I think PM Entertainment would be prepared to give you a break in the film industry. And I guess if you've got Art Camacho directing, he knows what he's doing with a fight scene. And if you've got somebody like Richard Pepin as the DP on that particular film, then you probably really can't go wrong, is it? It's probably quite a safe bet actually if you're thinking about Merhi and Pepin with their business hats on. Like they know that they're not gonna get into any trouble if with that type of lineup and arrangement, no matter how inexperienced say Art Camacho was at that time.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Because those are the two big things. Like Pepin could really frame those scenes as a cinematographer. He could really get like those explosions in Recoil, for example. I mean, I remember but any of his movies, right? The way he could frame those explosions and those fight scenes. But then, yeah, right. Art Camacho, was a next level fight choreographer that they definitely leaned on for a lot of movies, including this one, to really kind of to get the most out of those action films.
Definitely.
Now, one thing you brought up here, which is a really good point, as we kind of get into the synopsis of the film, is that this is the third of three Ring of Fires, and this one really doesn't fit with the other two. I mean, the character is the same. So Don the Dragon Wilson is reprising his role from the previous two, and then what was the actor's name? Mike Delano, is that his? My handwriting is horrible here. The police officer that helps him out at the end, the detective. I think that's his name, Mike Delano. Those are the only two characters that reprise their roles. But the original title for this movie was Lion Strike, and then Ring of Fire 3 was supposed to be the undertitle. The idea, I think, being that they didn't want to run into this issue of people thinking, oh, this is the third one, I need to watch the first two before I watch this so I know what's happening, because it is a bit more of a standalone than those other two. And what I found when I actually looked into it is that the other two aren't available on streaming. So if you're looking to just stream this through Prime or Tubi or something like that, the only one you can get is part 3. So, yeah, that's probably a good point for people to realize that you don't need to watch 1 and 2 in order to understand what's happening in this one.
Are there any other elements that carry over? Because one of the things that I was speculating about was the fact that perhaps they decided this was going to be a standalone film called Lion Strike, and perhaps at the last minute they decided to for marketing reasons turn it into a Ring of Fire film, and they just sort of airbrushed some continuity in. So giving perhaps they gave the dragon's character the same name as in the previous two films. I mean, one thing I from reading up about the first two films, it didn't seem to me that Don's character was a doctor in those two films, but as I've not seen them, I don't know. So I don't know if you can sort of fill in any sort of blanks there for me.
Yeah, so the first one was one that actually had a lot of buzz when it was being made, because Ring of Fire, the first Ring of Fire is like a PM Entertainment take on Romeo and Juliet. But of course, as you know, if Don the Dragon Wilson's here in part 3, it didn't end the way Romeo and Juliet ended, so he survived it. But that was the idea. It was supposed to be there's sort of Asians and Caucasians who are feuding, and then Maria Ford plays the Juliet type character. She also survives because she makes it to the second one, and then she dies in between 2 and 3. But that one, when they first announced, PM Entertainment is going to make an action version of Romeo and Juliet with Asians and Caucasians, I guess that they got like a flood of headshots from agents, people, especially among the Asian community, Asian actors. They were like, let's, oh, you're going to be part of Don the Dragon Wilson's crew. So it was like one of those things where I think that they leaked it accidentally or something like that, and it went nuts, like that, trying to get that cast. As a movie, it's not the best, but one of the funny things is, you're talking about him being a doctor. He's in med school in that one. He's
okay.
Right. He's supposed to be playing somebody in his late 20s, I believe. But at that time he would have been in his early to mid 30s, I believe, or maybe a little bit older. He was born in 54, but he's supposed to be playing somebody who's in school. And it really, I mean, there's a scene that's almost like out of an 80s prom movie where he goes to this dance to meet Maria Ford, and he's like, it's like a masquerade dance. I mean, it's a very ridiculous movie, and it's almost like this movie they're trying to repair some of the things that they tried in that other one, because he's definitely an adult doctor in this one that fits more with what his age and status was in life. So that was part 1. Part 2, they bring back Maria Ford. They bring back a lot of the cast from part 1 and part 2. And part 2 is more like a Warriors remake, where Don the Dragon Wilson, it's always like with Don, it's like in these movies, and in the Blood Fist too, it's like he just finds trouble everywhere, right? So it's like he can't go anywhere, right, without running into problems. So he's picking out an engagement ring, I think, for him and Maria Ford, and the place gets robbed, and of course he takes down the robbers, and then I think Ian Jacklin plays one of the relatives of the robbers, and so he's never any good, right? When in a PM movie, he's always up to no good, and so she gets shot in the robbery, and then he kidnaps her when she's shot. So she's, classic PM Entertainment style, she's got a bullet wound that seems to be okay for her while she's down in this underground area, being kidnapped, and he fights his way through these gangs, akin to like the Warriors, to rescue her and bring her back. Almost probably also akin to Double Dragon, which at that time I think that would have been around the time the movie came out for Double Dragon that was completely sautéed in wrong sauce. So it's possible that they were stealing from that. So that's where you kind of get to this one, and then this one here, it's almost like they say, okay, I think you're probably right, because when you look at the writing credits, it's like Wilson and Camacho, I think, developed the story, and then somebody fleshes out the script. So I think you're right that maybe somebody looked at their story and said, hey, what if we make this a third movie to Ring of Fire?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear the sort of the backstory on the first two films, and actually it does seem to follow on a lot more from those films than I initially kind of thought, because some of the stuff I was reading, they seem to be have one of those sort of classic punch fighting tournaments in them, and I was struggling to imagine how a doctor would end up getting dragged into one of those. But I guess thinking that, I probably reckoned without the ever inventive ways that PM Entertainment could cook up to crowbar a fighting tournament into one of their films.
Yes, well, that's right, because I think, the first one's the one that had the tournament, because it has Gary Daniels, I believe. He's in one of the two. I can't remember which one, but yeah, he's in one with a very small role, as Daniels was wont to be at that time, where he was always in these like really scant parts. And let me think. There were a few other names, like Vince Murdaco was in those. None of those names were in this one, so it's like they kind of just got rid of them at that point, and kind of just went with this one here. But it was I think the guy that he fights on the roof in the first scene was also in the previous films. I think he's like a buddy of his, but one thing you kind of probably get a sense of from somebody, being from England, kind of understanding how the American healthcare medical system works. You can see how Don the Dragon Wilson works really well for a for-profit hospital, and that he is beating people up and sending them to the hospital, which they can then go and bill the insurance for these broken bones and things like that. So you get a sense of how, Don the Dragon Wilson's perfect for the American medical system, especially in the early 90s, when there weren't even the regulations we had there. So, you're thinking about like, wow, a doctor who is a kickboxer. It's actually, for America, that's actually a perfect idea.
Well, I reckon he probably gets a very healthy yearly bonus from his employers.
Yeah, and I think somebody makes that joke in part 3, right? That the other doctor's like, you're sending people here. You're supposed to be helping people, not sending them here. But again, it's PM Entertainment. Fights happen anywhere. So you probably need a kickboxing doctor in your hospital just to be able to manage in the PM Entertainment world.
Well, I was thinking that would actually be a great concept for a PM Entertainment film. I was thinking, say you have a hospital, it's in a really rough part of town, it's the wrong side of the tracks, and trouble is always breaking out in the hospital, and you need, you've got Don as a kind of as a doctor who's really invested in the community. He doesn't mind working for a low salary in this really rough hospital because he feels like he's doing some good for the community. But he's the only, the police are nowhere. He's the only barrier stopping like all of these punks and thugs just sort of running rampant throughout the hospital. And you could probably spin some sort of drug plot on top of that, where there's some unscrupulous like executive at the hospital who's selling drugs sort of on the black market and kind of using the hospital as a way of kind of getting those supplies, and Don has to bring that man down. I was thinking that there's a real potential in that concept for a hospital. I was for a concept for a film. So sadly born 30 years too late, so I can't pitch that to PM Entertainment.
Yeah, I bet they would have loved that for sure, because it does. It fits like all the boxes. And then maybe like he somehow brings the gangs together when he finds out that executive's manipulating them all, right? And they all kind of come together, right? It's one of those things. And so you could, the characters you could put in that movie, you could have Evan Laurie and something like that. Art Camacho probably would be fight choreographer, but also would have a part, maybe a small cameo role. You could get everybody in that. So yeah, they would probably love the idea of something like that. And there would also have to be an ambulance flipping over, right, on the way to the.
Of course.
Yeah, so that would probably be. I don't think they ever flipped an ambulance, did they? That's a good question.
They flipped most things. I can't remember an ambulance off the top of my head, but if it had 4 wheels, then it's generally kind of done a 360 through the air at some point.
Right. So that would have been another selling point for them. Like, wow, we've never flipped an ambulance before. We could really do this here. So yeah, you're right. It's unfortunate, but if we'd only been born in the 60s or late 50s and been able to pitch these ideas to them, because it seems like they would take it as long as you didn't want a lot of money for your script. As long as you wanted it up there in lights, they would be happy to take it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it's not too late now to try and get this project up and running.
Yes, you could reach out to Art Camacho maybe and see like what he thinks about the idea. He might be interested in going back to the old days and seeing what he could do PM Entertainment style. Yeah. Now, just to kind of we'll go to do a brief synopsis of the film, just to give people an idea of what this movie's about. And like you said, Don the Dragon Wilson is a doctor who is also a kickboxer, and I'm going to skip the very beginning part because that's where our exploding helicopter action happens, and just kind of give the basic idea. It's your classic like Marx Brothers, Alfred Hitchcock MacGuffin type idea. I guess they were trying to figure out a way to switch bags, and so they decided that Don the Dragon Wilson, as a doctor in the 90s, has a house calls black bag that he carries around with him, and at the same time we've got Marcus Aurelius and Michael Jai White who rob a mob boss. They break into one of his warehouses, rip open his safe, and they take all the jewels and money in there, but they also take a 3.5-inch floppy disk with them. And that's the big thing that the mob wants, because that 3.5-inch floppy disk, it I guess it has the codes for nuclear bombs, or it allows the Russians. It's something to do with nuclear bombs, so they could get their hands on nuclear weapons with this disc, and it's all in that 3.5 drive. So it's very safe and in a very solid form of data management. So nothing wrong could happen to it. But then, of course, they find out that the White and Aurelius are robbing the place. So the mob goes in there, in classic PM style, a chase ensues, and the accident has to happen right in front of Don the Dragon Wilson. He goes to help out Marcus Aurelius because he's a doctor, right? Of course, he wants to make sure everything's okay. The bags get switched. Don goes up to a cabin in the woods that his doctor friend has with his son. Forgot to mention that the wife, Maria Ford, was killed off in between the two films. So she died in a car accident, not through any kind of PM Entertainment hokiness. Nobody killed her. Ian Jacklin didn't assassinate her or anything like that. It was just that she died in a car accident. But the mob goes up there after him to try to get the disc, and that's really kind of what happens. Is it's just a series of scenes where they try to get the discs. He fights them off, gets captured, fights them off, and eventually there's sort of the PM finale, right, in a warehouse where everybody takes everybody else out and we all live happily ever after. Will, what did you think of this movie in terms of the plotting, the action, all of that?
Yeah, so I thought this film was very much a film of two halves. So I think the first half is really action-packed, and it has some of that classic PM Entertainment surreal sort of nuttiness that you kind of know and love if you've watched some of their films. So I mean this film gets off to a really fast start. So we're thrown straight into this big action scene on the top of a skyscraper, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later, and then you have and that's all tied into basically this mafia mob boss who his gang are trying to sort of smuggle out of the hospital away from the police who have got him under arrest there. Then you have in classic sort of PM Entertainment style, kind of appropriate of nothing. Then this biker gang just decide to invade the hospital, and it's down to there's no security in this hospital part. I guess you don't need any security in the hospital when you've got Don the Dragon Wilson on your staff. So he has to have a big fight with this biker gang, and for reasons, you have a great moment during this big fight where one of the biker gang suddenly rides into the hospital on a motorcycle. I mean, quite how or why, you know what, it doesn't matter. It just looks great, and that's why they kind of go with it. And then we have the sort of the disc hijacking scene, and that's all in. I was kind of keeping tabs on this. That's all inside the first 22 minutes, and so I mean, it's a real action-packed first half of the film. Sadly, when things move to the cabin, it does seem to sort of slow down a bit, and things just kind of get a little bit less interesting. It sort of film sort of turns a bit into the second half is a bit more of a sort of deadly prey, most dangerous game type slog. So I kind of thought the first half very entertaining. Then the second half, there's still plenty going on, but somehow it just feels a bit more routine.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I think when I first watched this, like the review I gave it, I said, this whole thing was action-packed. I realized I must have tuned out after the first half hour or so, because I was feeling the same way. I mean, when he gets up to the cabin, you think it's going to keep moving in that way, because the first thing that happens is they go to pick up supplies and they meet Bobby Phillips, and they deal with the poachers, which I don't think there is maybe white slavers, maybe, but the other, or human traffickers might be the other one, where it's like they're instant baddies and you just want to see them get taken down. Like they can't get beat up bad enough, And so you see the two of them taking out these poachers, which was just fantastic. And then it turns into this sort of romantic thing between them, where he's talking about what, his wife dying, and how, his son's a good kid. And I think whenever you bring kids into it also, it slogs the film down. I think that's another part of it, because you have to figure out what you're going to do with this kid. And they do eventually pawn him off on an old farmer in the area. But yeah, I think you're right there, where and the other thing too is that that whole like who's got the disc kind of thing. It you can only do that, missing. I mean, there's movies I've seen that have done it really well for long periods. I know there's that movie Bound that the Wachowskis did before Matrix to prove that they could make the Matrix, where the money was the thing that was kind of being moved around the apartments, and they did a good job of it that way, of kind of keeping it there. Whereas I think here you have to be very creative to be able to have something, or you need to have multiple entities involved that are getting the disc. Like maybe if the Russians had taken it, and I think that's it. Just that Wilson has it and they want to get it. You can only do that so many times, I think, before it does start to grind its wheels a bit.
Yeah, unless the disc sort of changes hands, and so it's always moving from one group to a new group, and so the challenge of retrieving it from them becomes new and different. Whereas here it's just, well, Don's got it, and people are just trying to find it, and it just doesn't really it's just not an interesting element for the film. Although I mean, I know missing discs were a very popular plot MacGuffin in the 90s, but I think this film may well hold the record for most lines of dialogue where people sort of ask questions about the disc. I mean, if you had a drinking game where you took a shot of whiskey every time someone said mentioned something about the disc, I mean, you'd be in an alcoholic coma within about the first half hour, I reckon.
Yes, and it was interesting because a lot of the conversation regarding the disc was the main mob boss and then his underling who was chasing Wilson down, who was like playing this kind of like comedic like send up of the mob, the mob tough or the mob henchman. He was being played more for laughs, I think, even though he was walking around with a gun and shooting people. It seemed like he was being played, and it was just all these scenes of him calling, saying, "Oh yeah, we tried. There was like 13 of them, and we couldn't get, and of course we knew it was just Don that took them all out, and he was just being crazy. But yeah, I mean, it was a lot of that, like, we need the disc, you got to get it back. Okay, now we're going to send in the Russian guy, and he's going to get the disc back, and then finally they go to where we knew they were going to go, which is kidnap the kid, hold the kid hostage, and have the big final exchange thing. Like the moment that old farmer guy takes in the kid, that he's not long for this world, right? He's gonna get it. And and one thing that surprised me about this movie is that they didn't kill off Bobby Phillips or the police detective that works them, because usually those are people too. Like usually if you're the woman, sometimes she survives as the damsel in distress, but usually if you're a friend of the hero, you're going to get it at some point. For whatever reason, being a friend of the hero is like the most dangerous part in the position in the movie.
Well, because and I think you expect that to happen in this film because Don, I don't think he actually knows what's on this disc, does he? And right. So like why, so he could just very easily give this disc back. Like why is he invested in keeping the disc? So you sort of expect them to do like to perhaps kill somebody, i.e. Kelly, the kind of the love interest figure, played by Bobby Phillips, because then that would mean, okay, I now need to go and get revenge. It doesn't really, could be somebody's shopping list on that disc. You've killed my prospective love interest, so now you're going to get it. But this, strangely, the film sort of didn't go in that direction, which was a bit of a surprise. Not necessarily a pleasant one, though.
Well, I think that's one of the things with having the kid in the film as opposed to the wife, is that it's hard to kill off the kid. I mean, of course, PM's done it plenty of times. I mean, recoil is an example where the kids got killed, or where Daniels' kids got killed off in that one. But that seems to be the problem, right? Is you can't kill the kids off, and so it was almost like the film was spinning its wheels until it could get to the kidnap scene. It wanted to try to fill as much as it could to get to that kidnap scene and then get to the end of the movie and the final fight. And I think that was the problem, was that they wrote themselves into a corner like that, and they had to figure out ways to add in fight scenes and flesh it out, and it kind of grinded its wheels at that point.
Yeah, and there's just sort of a lot of, in that part of the film, just a lot of sort of running around in the woods, and quite where people are trying to get to, why they're trying to, people's motivations aren't 100% clear in that moment, and there's just the sort of the action scenes that are staged there just aren't terribly interesting. And after the first half of the film, this this portion of it does feel just a bit lacking, frankly, in imagination.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like, yeah, if you're a stuntman in this movie, like you're just waiting for Don to kick you in the head, and so it is like it's kind of those scenes where it's like, I mean, some of the things were good, but it was also like, yeah, like when they shoot up the cabin, when he's there, to try to get him, and then he kind of sneaks out and starts taking people out. It's like you get the initial payoff of the shooting up the house that was kind of cool, but then yeah, when he's taking them out, it's kind of like, he's just kind of sneaking in, doing it stealth way instead of like getting into like a real big fight with everybody. And I think that you're right. It was almost like it got to be like excitement by repetition. Only it wasn't that exciting either. Right? And so we were kind of in a bad way. I think sometimes with PM Entertainment, the way PM Entertainment's supposed to work, the way that their philosophy is that each scene builds off the next one. So you think of Recoil, where they start off with this huge bank robbery that leads to a huge car chase, and you think like, wow, what can they do to top that? And then they do, right? They have even bigger scenes throughout, or the Sweeper's another one like that. This one's almost like, this one kind of reminds me a little bit of T-Force in that sense, that they kind of give you the biggest stuff at the beginning, and then it's like, how do you keep it moving? And they that one also, that one had some bigger scenes, I think, throughout. I think that one's a little bit more fun than this one in that sense, that it didn't grind itself in that trouble. But it was almost like they gave us the best stuff at the beginning and couldn't keep it going with the way that the story went. It didn't have enough to maintain it.
No, and I think it does seem this film does sort of run out of steam, about midway through. But there's still, we're sort of pointing out a lot of flaws here, but there's still like a lot to really enjoy here. And one of the things I really latched onto in this film was the fact that just how much it embraces cliche here in terms of the characterization. So Don the Dragon, he's playing a doctor, so obviously he's carrying a stethoscope around with him at all times, just in case you're confused as to what role he's playing here. We have this sort of one of the ideas of this film is that you've got these different criminal gangs from around the world coming together to pull off this sort of nuclear weapons smuggling plot. So you have a classic group of Italian mafiosi who are dressed in that sort of ostentatious gold jewelry type way, which was kind of what how you pictured sort of mafia people in the sort of late 80s, early 90s. The Russians all go around with these Cossack hats on for largely no reason. The farmer that they palm the kid off on, he's a farmer because he's wearing a massive pair of baggy dungarees. The poachers are all dressed in sort of denim and check shirts because, I just loved how, there is really no characterization here apart from basically people's wardrobe.
Right, and like you said, like we talk about those mafioso guys, they were just like such caricatures of like the way they talked, the way they did things, and like you said with the Russians too, and then like Art Camacho comes in as a Colombian cartel guy, and that's his only part in the film, which I always get a kick out of seeing him in the movie because he's usually not, he's always in them for like a small bit if he's in them at all. And of course we never hear about the Colombians again. It's always between the Russians and the Italians at that point. But yeah, you're right about that. And then the biker gang, of course, they have to ride their motorcycles into the hospital. It's that part of it is. So the way I love about PM Entertainment is that they just, I think they just went for it with that kind of stuff. Like just let's just put these people here and do this and not worry about it. I mean, I wonder today if you could get away with that level. I mean, I guess there was nothing really like too stereotypical about anybody, but but you're right. I mean, the Cossack hats I think was the best part because I don't know how Southern California. I don't know, even if you're up in the mountains. I mean, was there snow? I can't remember if maybe they.
I don't think so. No, because they sort of go fishing and they have a sort of picnic. So I don't really think it's meant to be. I don't think it's clearly not the warmest time of year, but I don't. Nobody else is swaddled in hundreds of layers. So I can't think why some Russians who are presumably used to like -40 feel the need to don their Cossack hats.
Right, exactly. Now, one question I had for you was, when was the last time that you remember using a 3.5 floppy disk for anything computer related?
Oh, I mean, it's got to be I would say about 20 years ago. I mean, maybe 17, 18 years ago, but certainly no later than that.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think it was like early 2000. I think it was like '04. I had an old computer, and I thought, or I think somebody in one of my grad school classes in '04 had something on a 3.5 floppy drive, and I think it was like one of those things where people were scrambling to find a way to like read the information, like they couldn't find a disk for it. But it's funny because I wonder what kids who grew up without that think when they go to save something on a Word document or something like that, and they see this little icon up there. I wonder if they have to like go on Wikipedia and find out what it means, because like that's the enduring legacy of the 3.5, right? Is that whenever you save something, it's still that little icon there, despite the fact that nobody uses them anymore.
Yeah, it's a wonderful hangover from kind of times past. But in much the same way that that a sort of a needle scratch sound effect is still, even now, the sort of a signifier of somebody, of kind of the natural order being disrupted. So when in this age of digital streaming, I mean, do teenagers really understand what that sort of needle scratch sound means,
Yeah,
or even where it comes from?
right. I was gonna point, but I guess like DJs, I think, still scratch records, but you're right, like that kind of like the hard scratch kind of thing that we just sort of take for granted. That yes, it's like, whoop, and then suddenly everybody stops what they were doing, and somebody said something offensive or something like that, and people are dropping their glasses and looking with their mouths agape, right, at whatever happened there. Right? It's like, yeah, what are these things? The other thing I noticed was that he referred to his cell phone as a cellular. He said, "Call me on the cellular." So I guess that means that at that time in LA, the cell phones were ubiquitous enough that you could call them cellular without cellular phone attached to it, but they weren't the truncated cell phone. Now I know in England you refer to them as a mobile. Did you ever at any time call them a cellular, or was it always just a mobile phone?
I think in the sort of going back like 25, 30 years, I think there was a time when they were referred to as cell phones. And I think the sort of term cell phones and mobile phones was pretty interchangeable. But like now, nobody calls them cell phones at all whatsoever. So I think, yeah, that term has definitely fallen by the wayside. But one thing with the cellular phone in this was, I don't know what coverage of mobile phones was like in the States in 1994, but in the UK, if you went somewhere comparatively as remote as is suggested in this film, you wouldn't have had a hope in hell of getting a signal. So there would be no point in taking your cellular with you.
Right. I remember. So I remember some people had car phones at that time, which I guess was a little bit different. But I remember one of my friends had one. He was like one of the first people I knew that had one. I think in 1998 he had one. And I remember we were like on the highway, but like also in a relatively developed area. It's like he wanted to order a pizza, and I was calling, and yeah, I had no service. It was just being on the highway. But not around enough buildings. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of interesting. And he was like, I mean, and of course the other thing too is it didn't work, right? He gets up there and it didn't work. And I guess was there this idea that when they were writing that they thought, boy, the audience is going to wonder why he doesn't use his cell phone when he's up there, because he's a doctor and all doctors have. I mean, what did they felt like they needed to add it into the film like that? But it was interesting. Yeah, he gets up there and of course he has no service. And the other thing too is that it gave him a message saying he had no service, which I don't think that's how it worked either. That the phone would tell you you're out of the coverage area. I thought you just couldn't get anything, right? You couldn't connect or anything like that.
I think clearly technology has gone backwards since 1994, because if you're getting these handy messages that you have got no service when you've got no service.
Right, exactly. Now let's talk about the exploding helicopter actions, because one of the things I realized when I read my review of the film was that I think I mischaracterized the exploding helicopter a little bit in my review, and maybe it was because I wasn't. Again, I think I wasn't paying as much attention to the film as I probably should have been, because I didn't really ding it too much for the lack of action mid after the first half hour. So would explain why I probably didn't catch on as well as I should have to what was happening. But the way I describe it in my review is that some random old guy with an Uzi is shooting at Don the Dragon Wilson from a helicopter, and he blows the helicopter up, when that's actually not the case. It's actually a mob boss who is supposed to get moved to a prison from the hospital, and his underlings arrange it so a helicopter will come and whisk him away from the hospital and into safety, so he doesn't go to prison. Just so happens that Don the Dragon Wilson, our resident kickboxer / doctor, is on the roof of the hospital practicing his kickboxing skills when the helicopter comes in. And of course, for whatever reason, the helicopter has to spray the area with Uzi fire anyway to alert everybody that there's a problem. But yes, he's sort of the fly in the ointment there. The mob boss is there, and he grabs an Uzi because the helicopter pilot wants to escape and get out of there, and he knows what the trouble that Don the Dragon Wilson brings, and he doesn't want any part of it. But because the mob boss is, I guess it's his son or grandson or something like that.
Yeah, some sort of relative.
Right, so he wants to go and rescue him, and he's got the Uzi, and the picture that I captured, of course, is this old man with an Uzi firing at Don the Dragon Wilson, and then Don escapes away from him, hangs, kind of crawls to his, he's like hanging off the side of the building, and then he, with his pistol that he's taken off one of the mob guys, he shoots the helicopter and it blows up with the pistol fire. So I mean, what did you think of this sort of this exploding helicopter series of events here?
Well, I always enjoy an exploding helicopter, so overall, I look on this scene very, very favorably. I think it comes as part of a very entertaining sequence at the beginning of this film where you've got the mafia gang trying to smuggle this mob boss out of the hospital. In terms of the exploding helicopter itself, I did think it was, it's pretty cool as Don the Dragon's being, he's having to sprint across the sort of the top of this building to escape the Uzi machine gun fire. And then he's hanging off the side of the building, and there's a pretty cool shot there, which does suggest that somebody, probably a stuntman, is actually sort of dangling off the top of that building. I'm sure there's some sort of safety line involved in there, but still not something I would ever voluntarily do. So, props to the stunt guy there. And then we see, a couple of things which, are very familiar to myself as somebody who's seen now a lot of exploding helicopters, which is the phenomena of the overly explosive helicopter, because, just a few rounds of pistol fire from Don the Dragon are enough to send this helicopter into immediately exploding. It's not sort of damaged and then sort of spirals off somewhere before crashing, exploding, or anything like that. I mean, it instantly explodes, and I mean, it really explodes with a truly huge fireball. So it's an example of phenomena we've seen a lot, where very small arms fire can have a hugely damaging effect on a helicopter.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that made me love that scene initially. I think the thing that I realized, of course, is that it wasn't like they just pulled some elderly man out of a rest home and had him firing at Wilson with an Uzi, which is the way I depicted it in the review, but rather that he was a mob boss and that he had that it made a little bit more sense that he was firing the Uzi at him. But what's amazing is this is actually the second time that Wilson has taken out a helicopter with a pistol, which the other one I think was it the Cyber Tracker? Was that or one of those, right? I think it was the first Cyber Tracker where he did that, where he used a pistol to take out a helicopter.
My memory on that one is
virtual combat.
Is failing me, but it's a phenomenon that we've seen many, many times before, and although it has, I think, died out a little bit in recent years, I think filmmakers have realised that audiences are not quite as I don't know. I think they're granting us a little bit more sophistication and realise that we're just not going to believe that a vehicle capable of flight is quite so flimsy.
Right. Now, the other thing that kind of that got me about this was that the explosion happens very early in the film. I mean, it's within the first 5 to 10 minutes, and then later in the film, the Russian with his Cossack hat on, his big is flying around in a helicopter. And it's almost like they're teasing us for a potential second one that never happens. Is that something for you? If you see something early, especially if you see it early in the film like that, do you expect like, oh, maybe I could get 2 out of this one?
Well, there is a phenomena that we've documented called Chekhov's chopper, which whereby if you see a helicopter for sort of no discernible reason in the first act, you can be pretty confident that it will explode somewhere in the third. But I mean, I didn't. I can only put it down to a sort of sixth sense. So when I saw that second helicopter, I didn't feel like it was going to get blown up. I can't really tell you why I thought that. All I can put it down to is, the fact that I have now seen so many films with exploding helicopters that, I have some sort of, my subconscious is able to sort of process these cues, these, subliminal cues that filmmakers are feeding me. And that one, I knew it was going to be safe. In other films, like I can just tell, oh yeah, this one's definitely going to explode.
It's going to go up. But I mean, it was almost like it was teasing us. It was like, I was trying to think how to describe it. It's almost like if you were playing a video game where you had to like shoot ducks or something. And it was almost like or cats or something like that. It would almost like if it was like between levels or something to see it like kind of floating around, or like maybe like you lost the match and it was like, wanting you to count down to put coins in for the arcade game or something, and you're seeing it kind of floating around. It was almost like it was teasing us as it floated across the screen there. Like, oh, we could potentially have another helicopter, but like you said, maybe you were able to kind of discern that wasn't going to happen.
Not through, as I say, not through any great sort of magical powers. I don't know, just some sort of sixth sense that I seem to have. But one element, sort of slightly tangential to the exploding helicopter was, we see this start of the film, and there's this mafia, all this mafia business at the hospital. Don the Dragon Wilson is a doctor. He immediately goes into action hero mode, gets hold of a pistol, shoots at least 5 or 6 people, then blows up a helicopter. Now, I don't know about places you've worked, kind of former employers. If I had shot to death half a dozen people and then blown up a helicopter off the top of on the top of the roof of my office building, I reckon I'd probably be suspended from work for, they may not attach any blame to me whatsoever, but I'm probably still facing a period of suspension for some sort of period, but not at this hospital, because Don's back with his stethoscope dangling around his neck, seeing patients within minutes of all this going down.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think at the very least they would want you to take the day off just because you might be traumatized, right? By you might be hard to kind of get back into doing work with the adrenaline rush of having to kill 5 people. Like, right, they're probably going to wonder if like maybe they need to talk to the HR representatives and have you talk to one of the therapists at the hospital or something, right? And instead, no, you're right. He's just there with his charts and his stethoscope, and I mean, and the funny thing is what it is, right? That's weighing heavily on his mind is the fact that his wife has been killed, right? Like that's what the fellow doctor is telling him, like, why don't you go get away from this for a little bit and go up to the mountains to sort of get that off your mind. Not the fact that you killed 5 people and blew up a helicopter and were hanging from you watched your friend, right? Your sparring partner was also killed. I have trouble with that word with my New England accent, sparring, but the sparring partner, yeah, right. You and you didn't even talk to anybody, right? There's no therapist or anything like that. He just gets right back into it. And it's funny. I think my wife was saying, because she would watch the show Mannix. They show the reruns of it here, and I guess that the actor that played him said that he thought that the show should have done more to talk about sort of the PTSD that his character would have experienced, that having been shot at so many times and beaten up and all the things that he experienced on that show. And it's funny with these movies, there really isn't that aspect of it, right? Like his kid seems perfectly fine to go fishing with him after having been kidnapped. Like everybody's okay at the end, right? Everybody does okay with all of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, psychotherapy sort of, you started that was like huge in sort of 80s movies and 80s 80s TV. Obviously like things like Star Trek Next Generation. Suddenly you've got what's her name as the counselor, because everyone's got issues and trauma that they need to like process and digest. And so you'd think with a film made at this sort of period that with that in the kind of public consciousness that there'd be at least some reference to it. Maybe we don't see much, but at least somebody sort of says, oh, you're gonna have to go and see the counsel, the psychologist or whatever after all of that. But you mentioned Bobby Phillips and the whole thing with Don the Dragon's character kind of losing his wife. And there's a little scene with his son where he sort of says, oh, he sort of says he wants a new mom. And I guess there's this idea that sort of Don's been a bit slow getting back on the dating game after his bereavement or whatever. And so it sort of sets up this sort of sense that he can't face sort of but perhaps going and meeting somebody new. But literally then he meets Kelly, the gamekeeper, and within minutes he's arranged to have dinner with her. I mean, he demonstrates some serious he's got some serious moves here in terms of kind of closing, going from meeting somebody to closing the deal. I mean, I was seriously, I don't know why his son was worried about him ever meeting somebody. Is it clear Don's clearly a real player in this film?
Yeah, and actually, now that you mention it, I'm sure the hospital has plenty of single female staff members that would have probably been encountered. I mean, considering all the fights that happen in that hospital, right, with the biker gangs invading and all of that other stuff, that there would have been a similar moment to the poaching situation. That you would think he would have gotten on some dates with someone. So you're right, like how quickly he works there with Bobby Phillips. You're amazing. And the other thing you mentioned about the psychiatrist thing is a lot of times the way these movies would do it, right, is that that would be the female lead, right? She would be in like some kind of like like skimpy business suit type outfit, maybe with her hair up, and she would kind of be trying to like psychoanalyze them. Right, exactly, glasses, right? But then there'd be the scene where all of that's off, right? And they have dinner, they're drinking wine, and then there's a love scene. So I mean, it would have been a great way to use Bobby Phillips. They either have her as the ranger, but they could have had her as the psychiatrist, there, like why are you so cold? Like how could you just shot 5 people and you're perfectly fine, and, well, it's what I gotta do, and then kind of breaks it down. I mean, that was part of the problem, right? Is that these guys can't really show emotion, so you had to have the female there to be the emotion, right? And so yeah, I mean, that's always kind of how they did that with the psychiatrist. Right? It always was like the hot female lead was playing that part.
Yeah, and I think the whole thing with Bobby Phillips's character actually threw up one of my favorite moments in the film, where he's kind of got her to his cabin. They've had dinner. They've had a little sort of romantic chat, and they've had a little kiss. And then Don's son sees this, and he sort of goes, yeah, because he's going to get a new mom now. And Don pulls like a kind of funny face at his son after the kiss, which if you've watched a lot of Don the Dragon Wilson films, I mean, it's so unexpected because he's just not an actor given to sort of goofing around really at any time, and I just thought that was so unexpected. It was an absolutely brilliant moment for me.
Yes, I agree with you there. I mean, yeah, he was. It was almost like, I think the story and there was a sense that he was like trying to do some stuff here that he didn't normally do as an actor. But ultimately, like what we look for is just the fight scenes and things like that. But I think he wanted to get into this idea of the character bereaving the wife passing. And you're right, like he kind of really didn't do it too much. It was still more of that kind of like that wooden, emotionless, like, oh yes, I'm getting over my wife dying. Oh, it's bad and all that stuff. And then to see that happen, you're right. Where the whole thing was just kind of weird too. The son is kind of in the cabin doesn't have any other rooms to it, so the son is just there in the bed while they're having their date next to it. It was like the whole thing was really. And Bobby Phillips, of course, seemed perfectly fine with it because you could see for her, the crop of men up there where they're living is not very great. So she was just like, this is amazing. This guy is taking to me like this. I'm going to take it however I can get it at this point. So she was fine with it, but. Yeah, you kind of almost feel bad for Don that, like, I think that was the thing that with the kid, they just didn't know what to do with him. They didn't know where to put him or what to do.
Well, I think, yeah, I don't think as you say, I don't think anyone really knew. He gets foisted on this farmer, then he gets kidnapped, and mercifully we don't really have to see him much after that until the sort of slightly cheesy picnic scene at the end of the film.
Yeah, so which is great. Which again, the temperature was good enough for just flannel shirts and vests. I think there was no need for Cossack hats or anything like that. Yeah. Right. Well, I think that just about wraps us up here, though. Before we get into social media and all of that, Will, any other thoughts on this film or Don the Dragon or any of this stuff?
Well, there is one thing, just briefly, I just thought I'd quickly highlight. Right at the beginning of this film, when we see the very cliched homies steal from the mafia. So we see, Michael J. White in a very early role here. That scene where they carry out this theft there's a continuous long take tracking shot, which it's the sort of thing that you see. People endlessly, creating these long YouTube videos, kind of, extolling the virtues of that tracking shot by Martin Scorsese in Goodfellas, where, Ray Liotta's going into the restaurant. But, here we've got PM Entertainment just throwing one in to a low budget action film. And it's very well staged, goes on for at least sort of 90 seconds, 2 minutes. It's actually, when you're watching it on screen, it's actually quite a considerable amount of time. So it must have been taken some real painstaking filmmaking to set up and pull off. And I think we should give props to the crew who shot this film for pulling that off. So in terms of this film, I think it's the first half is really where the best stuff happens. It's pretty decent. I've seen quite a lot of Don the Dragon films here, and I think I don't know what your favorite is, Matt, but I think Cyber Tracker 2 may well be my favorite Don the Dragon Wilson film. I saw that very, very recently, and I wasn't really expecting much for it, but I was seriously impressed by that film. There's some really, really good action in that film. Great car flips. There's some very amusing, actually works quite well, kind of comedy woven into the first half of the film. So I think in terms of this for me sits kind of slightly above the middle in terms of I think Wilson's output. And in terms of my favorite, I'd probably go Cyber Tracker 2.
Yeah, I think this one is definitely, I think it's up there. I think for its PM Entertainment stuff, this is definitely one of the better ones. Yeah, I agree with you on Cyber Tracker 2, because the funny thing was I'm trying to remember what I thought of the first one, but I remember being like, oh wow, this second one here is so much better than the I wasn't expecting it to be. Which it's funny because I think that happens a lot, right? That the sequel is usually just a cash grab, and so I remember that one. The Blood Fist ones, I think it was Blood Fist 4 that had Gary Daniels in it. That I really liked the fight scenes in that one. That one I was really a fan of. So yeah, I think those few there for me. Because with the Blood Fist, it's hard because you're watching something that's really not like they're not there's no continuity there. So it's just kind of like, let's throw Don the Dragon Wilson in a situation where it's him against the world and maybe some woman helping him. So yeah, I think I want to say 4. It's 4 or 5. One of those two is my favorite, and I just can't remember which one it was that had Daniels in it. I think it was 4.
I've not delved into the Blood Fist series yet, but there's 8 of them out there, so I've got a good chunk of Don the Dragon Wilson to get stuck into yet, which is actually, that reminds me of one thing I did want to mention about him as an actor, is that I really admire the way that he has embraced throughout his whole career that he is Don the Dragon Wilson. I mean, a lot of these actors, they kind of develop a profile, they get famous, and they want to ditch their nickname. They want to ditch their tagline. I'm thinking of somebody like The Rock, who couldn't wait to move away from Dwayne The Rock Johnson to just being Dwayne Johnson. Whereas Don has embraced, I am Don the Dragon Wilson. That's what I was at the start of my career, and that is what I will be known until I stop making movies. And I really admire how he has just never had any idea about I'm too big now for my nickname. He is just always Don the Dragon Wilson.
Yeah, and I think also too, because especially now that he's doing more movies, there wasn't a sense too of like, I'm like you said, I'm too big for the nickname, or like I want to be known as a serious actor. So stop calling me. You're right about that. That he still now when he does movies, it's still Don and then the Dragon Wilson. He still sticks with it, which I think you're right. I agree with that. I think there is a sense that he really gets what his fans want out of a movie from him. And I think that's something you always have to appreciate, that he's always like he was considering a UFC career when that was first taking off. And I remember he used to be the commentator for the early ones, like the first like 4 to 5 of them. He was the commentator. And he had said like, I'm considering, doing this, but, I want to see if people have any interest in it. And I guess everybody said no. Nobody was really all that interested in seeing him fight in a tournament like that. So he didn't do it. He just didn't bother with it. He didn't see there was interest. And I think that is one thing for him, is that he recognizes that people see him as the Dragon. His fans want the Dragon. And I think he wants to, he feels like, okay, these are the people that are there for me. There's the people that are stick with me. I mean, I think like if he's like in like, I think when he was in the Batman movie and things like that, he was just Don Wilson. But, on the cover of his movies, it's still Don the Dragon Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, I get the sense of, I've not met the guy at all, but I get the sense that he is just a very unpretentious man, and just somebody who's sort of not burdened by a sort of big ego or anything like that. And I kind of get the impression that he's just a really nice guy. One of those people just sort of who never has a bad word for anybody else. I mean, I say very little evidence to really sort of support that, but that is just sort of the impression that I have of him. And I think that's why I find him sort of very endearing as an actor. Despite the fact that he is, let's be honest, quite limited. I just find him, he's got that endearing quality. So very happy to sort of overlook his shortcomings.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's funny, I saw this movie Death Fighter that he did in like the mid 2010s, where he was acting opposite Matt Mullins, who's kind of an up-and-comer. It's funny, he was born in 1980, so we think of him as being young for this, right? Even though he's like 40 this year, but he's like considered a young up-and-comer with this kind of thing. But it was funny because you could see him acting opposite Matt Mullins, where it's like you could see Don's experience show through, where it was like he was used to being on camera, he was used to doing scenes and all of this. And it's funny because I think when we look at PM Entertainment, a lot of times he was cast opposite people that had experience, someone like a Mike Delano or somebody who had been in a lot of movies before, and a lot of small parts, but a professional actor who had been around for a while. And you could see how limited he was against one of them because they had been doing this forever. But when you see him opposite somebody who's new to it themselves, suddenly you see that experience shine through with him. But there's also a sense too in that movie where he really wanted to bring Matt Mullins along. He wanted to show what Matt Mullins could do, which I really appreciated as well. That he's he's excited for the future of what this is, which I think I appreciate too. That he wasn't trying to outcompete Matt Mullins or trying to show him up or anything like that.
No, I think all reflects really well on him, and it's why he probably remains such a solid sort of fan favorite.
Yeah, I agree. And again, he puts out movies like this where he's just a great martial artist. It's just always good to watch him take care of business like this and do what he does. Now at this point, I guess we'll kind of do the social media part. So, Will, where can people find you?
Yeah, so if you want to find out a little bit more about the strange way helicopters explode in movies, then you can come and check out my website, which is explodinghelicopter.com. I also run a podcast as well, so you can find us on all the major sort of podcatchers. Just type in Exploding Helicopter. if you want to hook up with me on social media, yeah, I'm at Chopper Fireball on Twitter, and if you just sort of type in Exploding Helicopter into things like Facebook, Instagram, you'll find us fairly easily. So yeah, come and check us out.
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention too, because I've kind of myself with the whole quarantine and coronavirus thing, where I'm falling into more like reading rabbit holes. I think in the past, recent past, I wasn't reading as many blogs as I was like listening to podcasts and things like that, because you could do them while you're doing other things. One thing I really like about your site is that, and I had forgotten about, but kind of like when I was going back to look at it again with more time, it's not just the exploding helicopter part. Like, you also give facts about the movies and a really great commentary on it that's always really fun to read and funny. So yes, the exploding helicopter is part of it, but also it's sort of a full synopsis, so people get a good sense of the movie. One thing I learned when I read your Navy SEALs versus Zombies review was that I didn't realize that the U.S. Army actually loans out Navy SEALs and other servicemen for movies if you make the movie like this kind of jingoistic rah-rah, go Army kind of thing, because it has to be a propaganda piece, right, in order for you to have those troops. Yeah. That totally colored my understanding of the movie, because I was like, why are they doing this whole soldier's life part of the movie when it's supposed to just be Navy SEALs shooting zombies? And then when I read that part, I was like, oh, that makes sense. They had to shoehorn that in, which of course made the movie kind of slog down and all of that.
Yeah, there's nothing as worrying at the start of a film as seeing one of those messages that comes up saying, made with the full cooperation of the American military, because you're in for some for some real jingoistic rah-rahing.
Yes, and it totally colored my thought. Like, I was wondering like why they made the movie the way they did, and then I was like, oh, well, that makes sense now that I know that. And yeah, I mean, those are facts. I think so I think for people like one thing I would sell about your site is that yes, the exploding helicopter part is there, which is great. I think it's kind of a cool thing too, especially to check you out on Letterboxd and see all of the movies with exploding helicopters for people to like plan a bad movie night maybe around different exploding helicopter ones. But the reviews themselves of the movies, they're kind of they're full reviews. They're not. Yeah, and I think they're really great, especially I think for me especially. I think a lot of people though, I'm noticing like the site is getting more hits than the podcast, I think, because for people in this time, there's more blog rabbit holes. I think you can kind of go through a lot more in a blog rabbit hole, whereas like a podcast rabbit hole, it's like you kind of go and then you're stuck for an hour and a half doing the podcast, and then it's like then you might listen to another episode, but in that same hour and a half you could do like 5 or 6 blog posts.
Well, it's only taken a global pandemic to get people to read my website, so
well, I had read.
I'm not sure what I should think or make of that.
Well, no, I was thinking for my site the same thing. That it seems like it seems like nowadays people don't read as much as they used to. Like I think it's with a busy life, it's like okay, the podcast is something I can listen to while I'm making dinner, while I'm doing these reports for work or something like that. Whereas like reading, it's like you gotta set aside some time to do it. Whereas now it's like, like I might set aside time to like read your most recent post or something like that. But to kind of dig in and like read older posts, it's like, oh, now you kind of can do it. You can go to IMDb and see like who reviewed the movie that you want to look at and say like, okay, here's everybody's posts. I'm going to read all their posts. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like for me, I'm doing more rabbit hole reading than I did before.
Well, if some of that is bringing you to my website, then all power to you.
Yes, but definitely. And I want to also plug your Twitter, because you post really great GIFs and scenes from exploding helicopter movies, and there a lot of them are hilarious. I think one of them recently was Alien 3000, which I really loved. So those are great too. I think people should definitely follow. At the very least, to get those little tidbits there, watching those pop up on my dash are always fantastic.
Yeah, I try and post, a clip of an exploding helicopter from a different film every day. So yeah, and some of them, if you start following me on Twitter, as you will find out, some of these scenes are absolutely bonkers. Yes. So yeah, hopefully, if you follow us on Twitter, hopefully we will bring a little entertainment into your day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a part of the movie, the action movie, that we all kind of recognized as a fun part of the exploding helicopter, but the ways in which it happens, I think I think for all of us, like we may see like one or two of these crazy ones, whereas you've seen a lot of them, and so it's almost like a one-stop shop to kind of get at that. And again, I think it draws people to for a bad movie night to kind of see something like that. It's like, oh, this is a really great inspiration for a bad movie night. I think to be like, oh, here's one exploding helicopter. Let's see some other ones that have it, and sort of watch like 2 or 3 of these exploding helicopter movies in a night.
You're giving me an idea for hosting a festival now, Matt.
Yes, Exploding Helicopter Festival. I like that. That would be, I guess it would be remote now, but maybe in the future it could be something that, a theater hosts and, have some of the greats. Right? Have some of the all-time bests.
Yeah, coming in 2021.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Will, for coming on. It was another great episode. I really enjoyed having you on, and and thank you everybody for listening to the Direct to Video Connoisseur podcast. We'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.
Be honest. Since you got up this morning, have you done anything new? Tried any new foods? Listened to new music? Or taken a new route? The good news is, the day isn't over.
Hey Lexus, turn it up.
And the reinvented Lexus RX is definitely something new. With heart-pounding design, intelligent technology, and the first ever RX 500h Performance Hybrid. Never lose your edge with the all-new Lexus RX. Click the banner to discover more. Experience amazing at your Lexus dealer.